In July 1518, in the city of Strasbourg, a woman stepped into the street and began to dance. There was no wedding, no music, no circle of people clapping around her. She moved alone, for hour after hour, until exhaustion forced her to the ground. Then she stood up and began again. The familiar version of the story gives her a name, Frau Trophia. It says she danced for nearly a week, that 30 people joined her, then 100, then 400, and that some of them danced until their hearts stopped. That version is repeated everywhere. It is also more certain than the evidence. The Strasbourg outbreak was real. The city council reacted to it. Preachers mentioned it. Chroniclers described people dancing for days without wanting to dance. But the name Frau Trophia comes from the physician Paracelsus, who arrived in Strasbourg years later. The number 400 is an estimate, and the famous claim that 15 people died every day does not appear in the surviving city records. Later chronicles do speak of dancers collapsing and some dying. We do not know how many. So the honest story begins here. In the summer of 1518, dozens, perhaps eventually hundreds, of people lost control of their bodies in public. They danced without pleasure, without rest, and apparently without the ability to stop. That is strange enough. Strasbourg was not a village on the edge of the map. It was a wealthy free city of the Holy Roman Empire, governed by merchants, guild leaders, and educated officials. When the dancers multiplied, the council called the doctors. The doctors rejected possession. Their diagnosis was physical. The dancers, they said, suffered from overheated blood. And their treatment followed logically from their mistake. If the illness was trapped heat, the patients had to move until it burned itself out. The council cleared guild halls. It opened part of the grain market. It erected a wooden stage and paid musicians to keep playing. Professional dancers were reportedly hired to help the afflicted continue. Think about the scene. A frightened person begins moving uncontrollably. The government places that person on a stage. Music starts. A crowd gathers. Every anxious citizen in Strasbourg is shown exactly what the illness looks like. The number of dancers grew. The council had turned a symptom into a public performance. When the plan clearly failed, the city reversed itself. Music and public dancing were restricted. The afflicted were taken away from the crowds and transported toward a shrine associated with Saint Vitus. They were given red shoes marked with crosses, prayed over, and led through a healing ritual. Then, by September, the outbreak ended. To us, the treatment sounds like superstition replacing medicine. To the dancers, it may have done something more useful. It changed the story their bodies were trapped inside. The most popular modern explanation begins with bread. Rye can be infected by a fungus called ergot. Eat enough of it and the result can be horrific. Convulsions, hallucinations, burning pain, restricted blood flow, even gangrene. Chemicals derived from ergot helped lead, centuries later, to LSD. So perhaps Strasbourg ate contaminated rye and began to dance. It is a satisfying explanation because it turns an impossible event into poisoning. But it does not fit very well. Ergot does not normally make people perform coordinated movements for days. Severe poisoning makes walking difficult, not contagious. It should strike people who shared contaminated food, families, bakeries, neighborhoods, not people who watched another person dance. And dancing outbreaks appeared in places where rye was not always the main grain. Most importantly, ergot cannot explain why the symptoms followed a script people already knew. Long before 1518, communities along the Rhine told stories about saints who punished sinners with compulsive movement. Saint Vitus was believed to have the power to curse a person to dance. Earlier dancing manias had appeared in the same broad region. The people of Strasbourg did not merely fear illness. They feared this illness. The years before 1518 had been brutal. Harvests failed. Grain prices rose. Hunger weakened families. Syphilis had arrived in Europe. Plague and leprosy still returned. Religious conflict was intensifying, and ordinary people lived with the belief that suffering might be punishment made visible. Stress is often described as a feeling, but prolonged stress is also physical. It changes sleep, breathing, Muscle tension, attention, and the way the brain predicts danger. Under the right conditions, that system can produce symptoms without conscious permission. Tremors, paralysis, seizures, fainting, loss of voice, abnormal movement. Modern medicine places many such cases under functional neurological disorder. The symptoms are real. The patient is not pretending. A brain does not need damaged tissue to lose control of a function, just as a computer does not need a broken screen for its software to fail. When similar symptoms spread through a connected group, researchers use the term mass psychogenic or mass sociogenic illness. The old phrase was mass hysteria. It survives mostly because it is memorable, not because it is precise. These outbreaks need more than fear. They need a model, a visible example of what distress is supposed to look like. Attention reinforces it. Expectation gives it shape. Observation carries that shape from one nervous system to another. In Strasbourg, the model stood on a wooden stage while musicians played. 5 centuries later, the street became an algorithm. During the COVID era, movement disorder clinics in several countries saw a sudden rise in teenagers with abrupt, complex tic-like movements and vocal outbursts. Many had watched highly popular creators posting videos about Tourette syndrome on YouTube or TikTok. The pattern did not look like typical Tourette syndrome. Tourette's usually begins gradually in childhood, often with simple movements around the face or eyes. These new cases appeared suddenly, often in adolescence, with elaborate gestures and repeated phrases. Some patients in the same language group produced strikingly similar behaviors. Researchers called them functional tic-like behaviors. One group proposed a more unsettling name: mass social media-induced illness. That does not mean TikTok causes Tourette syndrome. It does not mean everyone with a tic is copying someone. And it does not mean the affected teenagers were faking. It means that distress can become physical, and that human beings can learn the form of a symptom from other human beings, even when they never occupy the same room. In 1518, transmission required a crowd. In 2021, it required autoplay. The symptom changed because the culture changed. A person in Strasbourg feared a saint's dancing curse. A teenager during lockdown encountered a vocabulary of tics, diagnoses, and viral identities. Different stories, different movements, the same disturbing possibility. The body listens to the world more closely than the conscious mind realizes. Here is where I stand. I do not think poison bread made Strasbourg dance. The social pattern is wrong, and the physical symptoms of ergot poisoning are a poor match. I also do not think the event was invented. Too many independent records describe an outbreak, and the city took concrete administrative action against it. The strongest explanation is a motor form of mass sociogenic illness, shaped by famine, disease, religious fear, and the existing belief in a dancing curse. The city then amplified it by gathering sufferers, displaying them, and adding music. But strongest is not the same as proven. We cannot examine a patient. We cannot test the bread. We cannot even state with confidence that 400 people danced or that anyone died. 5 centuries of retelling have blurred the border between archive and legend. And yet the part we can document may be more unsettling than the legend. A city watched involuntary movement spread from body to body. Its leaders tried to cure the problem by making it more visible. The symptoms stopped only after the performance was broken apart and replaced with a ritual everyone involved believed could end the curse. They were not foolish people trapped in a foolish century. They were human nervous systems responding to stress, expectation, and one another. So the distance between Strasbourg and us is not 500 years. It is the distance between a wooden stage and a phone screen. If a culture can teach the body how to lose control, what symptoms might our own culture be teaching us now? Tell me what you think happened in Strasbourg. And if you want more true stories where the evidence is stranger than the legend, subscribe. That's what we do here.